ASMR Magical Tools. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. So, I actually just got this deck in the mail today. It is the Somnia Tarot by Nicolas Bruno. And this is a photography tarot deck. So you can tell that a lot of work and care went into the crafting of all of the cards in this deck. So I thought that what I would do is put on this pair of black leather gloves and do a flip through and look at all the cards. Look at all the cards. So, it's a very sturdy box. I did go ahead and take the film off because I wanted it to be a crisp, clean experience for you, the viewer. Here is the booklet, the Somnia Tarot, an exploration of the subconscious through photography, sculpture, costume design, and one of my personal favorites, dream journaling. So I'm just going to put that off to the side for a minute. On the back, I'm going to hold this up to the camera so that you can see all of the social media contacts pertinent to this deck. It looks like they're on Instagram or Twitter possibly, or both. And they have a website as well. And I'll be linking those things down in the description box. And then this is just a little card that came with the tarot cards. So let's look at the first card. We have the Fool, and you can see this is somebody who is climbing out of their bed and going out the window, almost like astral projection during sleep, going out into uncharted territories. Next we have the card of the Magician, and you can see here the sword. There's a bucket here. There's the pentacle here. He's got the instructions for his workings here. And then he's holding a candle, and because fire is particular to the suit of wands, I'm going to assume that that candle in the Magician's hand represents the suit of wands. The Magician is about your powers of manifestation. Next we have the card Priestess. And the High Priestess is someone who possesses much secret knowledge. The card of the High Priestess is about secret knowledge. And she's holding, in her hand, she's holding, if you can see that, a pomegranate. And then she also has this book of secret knowledge tucked under her arm. I really love how he handled the motif of the columns in this deck, that he has the black and white plumes of smoke coming out behind the figure. Next, we have the card of the Empress. And the Empress on this card, you can see she has the creative flame of the candle on the table next to her. And then she's sewing this garment. She is in the active process of creation. Active process of creation. The Empress is another strong manifestor in the tarot deck, but this is the kind of manifestation through fertilization. This is the growing of crops, the planting of seeds, and the harvest. Next, we have the Emperor. You'll have to forgive me. I live beneath a water wheel. I am a small frog. So the Emperor here is beneath this scaffolding on which there is suspended an anvil, heavy being the head that wears the crown. With great power comes great responsibility. The Emperor is draped all in black, and beneath his arm is a book. It could be a book containing all the laws of the land. The next card is the Hierophant. And the Hierophant here is draped in white to represent the connection with the divine. White is often equated with purity, but it's important to understand the genesis of that thought. That the divine white light of the universal creator, the Big Bang, if you will, is all of the colors at once in the form of white. Every spectrum, every wavelength of color. The Hierophant has that connection to the divine and represents the status quo. The Hierophant can also be the tradition of marriage in a tarot reading. Which brings us to our next card. The next card in the deck is the Lovers. Through their union, they elevate each other. You can see the one burning bush on this side and the growing bush on the other side. That's part of the iconography of the Lover's card, which can often be ignored. Often there is an angel depicted here on the card, but because is taking them up into heaven. That would be where that representation lies. There is a cloud, perfectly framed, kind of in the background, that does look quite a bit like an angel. Behind this figure's back, she's holding a piece of fruit that could be a quince or an apple, possibly. Oftentimes, on the card of the lovers, there are allusions to the story of Adam and Eve in the Bible. Behind the man's back, he's holding, if you can see that, a pair of scissors. And their hands are bound together. There used to be traditional hand fasting ceremonies, and part of that involved the married couple getting their hands tied together. And the scissors would represent that at any time the man could choose to end that bond, to break and cut that cord. The Lovers is not just a card about relationship dynamics. It can also be a card of choices, much like the Two of Swords. But let's not get ahead of ourselves just yet. The next card we have here is the Chariot. The charioteer himself, swathed in red fabric. This is a card of dynamic motion and a card of victory. However, you can see that at the base of the card, the two figures pulling the chariot are pointed in entirely different directions. The Chariot is also the card of the astrological sign of Cancer, according to Golden Dawn correspondences. Leo's card is the Strength card. Typically, a lion is depicted on the Strength card, and a woman with a lemniscate over her head, prying its jaws apart. But in this particular interpretation, you can see that she is prying open this gigantic bear trap. The Strength card is not just about strength of a physical nature. Strength encompasses psychological strength, strength of will also, and in some cases, the Strength card is also equated with lust, and through lust can even be tied to sex magic. The next card we have here is the Hermit. The Hermit is Virgo's card in the tarot deck. I think this is an especially beautiful representation of the Hermit. He is walking out into the depths of the ocean. Often the ocean is used as a metaphor for spiritual and esoteric knowledge. celebration of enlightenment, and also bears this staff. The Wheel of Fortune in the tarot is about a change of fortune, either for or against your favor, depending on whether the card is upright or reversed. And I really love how the equation is made between the passage of time and how fortunes and cycles turn. That this is an aspect of our existence which can be seen as quite linear, like the passage of time as charted by our timekeeping sources. We have the Justice card next. And of course, the Justice card is holding these scales. But the Justice card is also yoked to something that they are dragging behind them that is out of frame. It's over here somewhere. We can't see it. And is holding this sword of truth aloft. The card of justice in the tarot is equated with the astrological sign of Libra and is about balance, 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 balance. Now, all of the figures in this deck so far have had their faces covered, but justice is typically blindfolded in the tarot. Next, we have the Hanged Man. The Hanged Man is associated with the element of water through Golden Dawn correspondence, and thus can also be equated with the planet Neptune and the 3 water signs. The Hanged Man is suspended over this pool of water. There are elements of stasis to the Hanged Man. There are also elements of self-sacrifice and of indecision and inability to act. One thing that's really beautiful about this deck is that there are a lot of very unique and subtle details, but there's a lot of simplicity to it as well. The Death card here is associated with the astrological sign of Scorpio in the tarot. He has this white rose upon his banner. In this particular case, the Death card is swathed in white fabric along with his mount, his steed. necessarily mean physical death. It can also mean transformation and a cycle renewing itself. Next, we have the Temperance card. The Temperance card is typically one of the archangels. It could be Gabriel because of the association with water. But remember that the Temperance card is also associated with the astrological sign of Sagittarius and is depicted most often with the triangle upward pointing of fire on their chest, and so could also be the Archangel Michael. The important part is that they are pouring this immaculate cup of tea without spilling a single drop. I very much like the tea metaphor employed in this deck because there are tea ceremonies all over the world which require special knowledge and expertise to carry out all of the rituals exactly correctly. And that is the true energy of the Temperance card, which is also associated with the Bornless Rite, so don't forget that either. The mastery behind the craft. There are elements of balance and patience associated with Temperance also, but it is about art and mastery most of all. The next card is Capricorn's card, the Devil. You can see in the foreground, these two figures are loosely draped and bound by these thick, coarse ropes, by this figure, this dark figure behind them, and that dark clouds are rising up from the horizon. In theory, either of these figures at any time would be free to lift off these loosely coiled ropes and leave. And yet they stay. They are also seated on a bed which carries its own implications of carnal desire. The next card is associated with the planet Mars and is the Tower. I probably won't give correspondences for each and every card in this video, but maybe we can save that for another time. The Tower is another type of change, of ending, very much like the Death card, and is associated more with destruction. The fire, just like this structure here on this person's back, clearing out everything in its path, a kind of purification star. We have this lone figure, high and far, upon this hill, surrounded by very sparse trees. There are a few faint stars up in the sky as well. This card of the star is associated with a person's hopes and dreams being achieved, being manifested into the material plane. So the star can be seen as another card associated with manifestation. But in this case, the outcomes, the results of that manifestation. The next card is the moon, and the moon is a very watery card. It's very cyclical, and it is associated with dark and treacherous paths. Here, the moon is high up in the sky, and this figure is climbing this ladder, and it appears that the figure might be climbing the ladder to get closer to the moon, but it is an illusion. The ladder is nowhere near tall enough to reach. The moon can also be associated with the arts. This next card, the sun, is always a good card in readings. Always, always, always. Good fortune and success. Here we have a rider, draped and draped again, and carrying a banner, all in this decadent crimson red. Astride a mount draped in white. This figure, many of the figures in this deck are in the water, but you can see that the figure on the sun card has the water in the background at sunrise and is on solid ground, very solid ground. The next figure, the next card, is the Judgment card. This angel here, next to this ladder, is going to be leading all of these figures draped in black up to their higher rewards. Perhaps all of them will go. Perhaps some will choose to stay behind, as we have. Perhaps some don't make the cut. The Judgment card is a card about tests. It is a card about trials and initiation. This can represent greater moments in your life in which you define your destiny and purpose. Judgment card would not be considered a card of manifestation. The final card of the major arcana is the World card. Here we have the figure lying in a bed, but not lying in a bed. Upright in this bed, which has been propped on end. Lying upright in this bed, which has been propped on end. The edge of their garment is soiled here, tying them firmly to the earth, and they are wreathed in this vine material. They too are on solid ground. They are on this sandy beach, hard packed from the tide, and the waves roll in behind them. The World card is a card of completion. It is a card of ending cycles. It is a card of success when it is in the upright especially. Now we will begin looking at the minor arcana with the suit of wands. The suit of wands has to do with fire. Place these gently over here for the time being. The suit of wands corresponds to the element of fire, and the ace of wands is the purest form of that element. Pure, manifesting, creative energy. Fire is an active element, and there are very phallic aspects to the active elements of fire and air in the tarot that cannot be ignored or denied. And thus, the Ace of Wands, especially in the upright, expresses potency and masculine powers of creation. Here the figure is rising out of a smoky pit in the earth. On this ladder, there is also an aspect of transcendence to this card, as the ladders in this deck represent traveling up into heaven. Traveling between worlds. The Two of Wands. So one thing I really like about this deck is that the wands are sometimes also represented by candles. We have one there, and the other one is up in this niche in the wall, in the stone wall. We see the sun in the background there, in a very heavy mist. The Two of Wands is a card about planning and charting your future course. The Three of Wands is a card I like to call the threefold card. All of the energies that you have put out returning to you threefold. figures here, each one bearing a torch. Perhaps they are looking out onto the horizon to see what is returning for them. The Four of Wands. Here we have the 4 candles, and they're between these 2 people. The Four of Wands in the tarot can be a card of marriage. It is a card of celebration. This would not be like just a weekend party. This would be a commemorative occasion, such as a wedding, a graduation party, or perhaps a coming-of-age ceremony. Next is the Five of Wands, and we see here that this figure is holding a bellows and is extinguishing some of these candles. The Five of Wands is associated with rivalry. It's the kind of rivalry where people are comparing themselves against each other in order to better themselves. These rivalries can be toxic, but sometimes they lead to very fruitful collaboration. But at this stage, there can be a lot of crab mentality involved, and trying to keep others from succeeding rather than paying attention to improving one's own craft. The Six of Wands is a card of victory, and here we have this figure on this block of stone in the middle of the water, holding a candelabra with 6 flames aloft. There are also aspects of the Six of Wands of resting on one's laurels after a victory. Here in the Seven of Wands, we see torch-bearing crowd thronging this figure on the hill. This figure is holding a shield and its own torch in self-defense, having to protect oneself against this horde, this mob. But by merit of the fact that one has achieved a high vantage point in a certain situation, do remember that the Seven of Wands comes after the victory of the Six of Wands. And here we see a chandelier turned pendulum hanging over the head of this figure. The Eight of Wands is a swift closure to a situation. It is a form of ending, not as severe as the Ten of Wands, and with much more closure. There is an implication on this card that this figure is seated at a dining table. You can kind of see that almost in the background. is the Nine of Wands. This is the card of self-defense. Self-defense. Having one's guard up. This figure standing here on this candelabra, which is in the middle of the water. If they were to step off, they would have to learn to swim very quickly. And they hold this umbrella to shield them from possible rain or from the surf, even though they are already in the water. Next is the Ten of Wands, and much like the Emperor card here, we have this scaffolding holding over this person's head, this candelabra with the 10 candles on it. This figure is bound also to the scaffolding, if you can see that, very securely around the waist, such that if they move, the candelabra could come down upon them. The Ten of Wands is a card of burdens and of oppression. Next, we have the Page of Wands, the genesis of creative thought. The Page of Wands can be a youngish person who is a fire sign also. And in this particular card is depicted in sealing a letter with wax and a stamp. Next, we have the Knight of Wands. Here, the wands, the candles. The Knight of Wands is fire of fire energy, burning very hot. While the King of Wands has the discernment of air, the Knight of Wands is all-consuming and passionate. The Knight of Wands can also be a fire sign person, more to the youngish side, but most importantly, someone who is very passionate, almost to a fault. Next, we have the Queen of Wands. Here in this card, surrounded by candles, almost to the point that it would catch her garment on fire. The Queen of Wands is charming, charismatic, and can light a room merely by entering. And finally, we have the King of Wands. While the Queen of Wands is a very receptive type of energy, the King of Wands is an active energy, an enforcer, air of fire energy. This gentleman leads by charisma. Inverted, he could be a cult leader. Upright, a beloved leader. I guess cult leaders are beloved too, but upright, a beloved and just guide to a nation. Next, the water suit, the suit of cups. Cups are our emotions, the watery depths within our hearts, the blood that pumps investment or a new emotional cycle in your life. It could be meeting your best friend or your future spouse. A hand off to the side here is turning the crank to raise this bucket. Next, we have the Two of Cups. I really love how this is depicted here. I have seen this motif on a few different tarot cards, maybe not necessarily the Two of Cups, but I've seen it in other decks, and I think it really encompasses the energy of this card, which is alchemical marriage. This can be two people coming together in a romantic relationship or in a friendship. It is a very strong bond between two people. Next is the Three of Cups. Here we have a figure in black. We have a figure in deep crimson red. And we have a figure in white. And they are pouring all of their cups together out onto the ground. Some tarot readers read the Three of Cups as a third-party situation. I prefer to see it as playing the field, dating around, not being in an exclusive relationship necessarily. And also as close and deep bonded friend groups. Closely and deeply bonded friend groups. There are also implications with the Three of Cups of partying. This would be like backyard barbecues, watching a football game with your friends, or other close bonding activities, and sometimes there being exciting libations involved. The Four of Cups is a card of choices. We see here that this figure is already yoked with these two buckets, but that two more buckets are here on the ground, such that this figure has options of how much water or how little water they would like to carry. The Five of Cups is a card of disappointment. This figure is turned away from these buckets, three of which are full, but two of which have been tipped over. They are tied up such that they cannot pick up any of the buckets, and they even have an umbrella over their head to prevent any purifying drops of rain from touching them. It is an emotional dry spell. The Six of Cups, associated with childhood. You can see an older looking figure here pouring water for the much younger looking figure. So this can be about things returning from one's past, or it can be about nostalgia for old times. The Seven of Cups is another card of choices, many choices when we're talking about the Suit of Cups. However, in this case, some of the choices are good and some of them are not. But there's no way of knowing what is in some of these buckets until you have pulled them down snake has already bitten you. The Eight of Cups. The figure on this card has almost completed this task, and yet has turned their back and is walking away, off frame. We can't see where they're going. Perhaps they don't know themselves. In this particular deck, the Eight of Cups journey is occurring on a boat. Typically, the boat is specific to Six of Swords energy, so I'm interested to see how that card will look. I haven't peeked through these cards yet. I thought we could do it together. The Nine of Cups is the card of wish fulfillment. Even in the reverse, it is still a very good card, much like the Sun card. So, in this deck, the Nine of Cups is depicted as filling this space between these two stone walls, and water is gushing down over the buckets and through all of the little cracks and crevices. It is a waterfall. The Ten of Cups. This is also really beautifully done, how the water is pouring back and forth between them. It's really amazing that all of this was done with photography. I'm very glad to have my hands on this deck. And much like the Ten of Cups, I feel that an emotional cycle has completed for me, and a deep sense of fulfillment. The Page of Cups. I think it's very interesting that they've chosen this diving suit motif for this particular card. The Page of Cups is offering something, and in this particular case you can see there's a message in a bottle in the foreground. So I think that was a really amazing and beautiful way to handle that. Next is the Knight of Cups, and you can see that this figure is holding an umbrella to protect themselves from water coming in from the outside, from divine source, if you will, and is also dumping water representing their own emotions out into the ocean. The Knight of Cups is somebody who feels very deeply and who operates based on gut instinct. The Queen of Cups, water of water energy. She pours this bucket out from her lap into this bucket with greenery growing in it, a metaphor for fertility and the Holy Grail. The Queen of Cups is a very maternal figure, very caring, but emotionally closed off to others, very secretive about one's emotions. And finally, we have the King of Cups, someone who has mastery over their emotions, seated on this beautiful white throne, holding the bucket steadily in their lap, and flanked by these other buckets, which are full. The King of Cups is a paternal figure and has the active elemental energy of air to augment the passive elemental energy of water. The King of Cups cares deeply for those around him and has the action and potency to aid them when it is needed. Next, we will explore the element of air as depicted in the suit of swords. Suit of swords, suit of swords. The Ace of Swords is much like the Ace of Spades and is often equated with the Death card and the Tower, but the key difference is that the Ace of Swords is a change effected from within the individual, such that there is control and wielding with purpose of that sword. Here you can see that the person is climbing out of this trunk, climbing out of the darkness into enlightenment and purpose. The Two of Swords. This figure sits in, it looks like shallow surf, that there might be somewhat of a rock wall here. They are thus submerged a bit in the water. This figure is blindfolded and thus not able to see the totality of the two paths represented by these swords that they are holding, right? The moon shines here behind them. It's very beautiful how on this card the two swords are, because of the shadows, different colors, black and white, depicting the duality. The Two of Swords is a choice at the crossroads between two separate paths that you might decide to take. The Three of Swords. These three swords are hanging points down over this person here, who is huddled in the fetal position, a very defensive position, defensive and yet passive at the same time. The Three of Swords can be about interpersonal conflicts, arguments, breakups, and general turmoil between individuals. There is not necessarily an implication with the Three of Swords of one person being right and the other person being wrong. The Four of Swords. Oh, this is very interesting. So, this figure in the foreground is kind of mirrored by this stone or whatever this thing is in the background, so I really like that about this card. The Four of Swords is a card of rest and taking time to heal oneself after a battle, as with the Three of Swords. You can see that this figure is pinned down on the four corners of this sheet. by these 4 swords. The 5 of Swords can be a card of victory, but it is victory at the cost of close personal associations. So we see here that this figure is trying to climb this ladder, and if they could but reach any of these swords, they could cut the ropes that are preventing them from reaching their higher place. The 6 of Swords. Oh yes, remember I said when I was talking about the 8 of Cups, because of how that was handled, I was very interested to see how they were going to handle the 6 of Swords in this deck. And in fact, they're depicting this person in a hot air balloon. See the motif of the ladder here as well. And in order for them to move on and make their departure, they have used these 6 swords to slice open the sandbags, holding the air balloon close to the earth, close to the beach. I really like the sand touching the other sand. That's very, very tingly for me. The way that the ocean, there's like a little strip here of ocean between the bottom of the air balloon and the beach, the hot air balloon and the beach, and the way that the horizon cuts off the top of the balloon there, or the top of the basket rather, because obviously we can't see the balloon itself in the framing of the card. It's a really beautifully framed card, and I really love that the metaphor of rising into the air was used here because of how the boat was used. Well, maybe not because of, but because they used the boat in the 8 of Cups. I'm really glad that they decided to use rising up into the air, and of course, swords being the element of air. So that's very, very cool. Very well done, Mr. Bruno. Next, we have the 7 of Swords. This person is carrying off a chest, the implication being it is full of treasure, and in the chest are stabbed these swords. And this figure climbing up this hill, almost a Sisyphean task. The 7 of Swords can be a card of treachery, betrayal, and theft. And often, the 7 of Swords will show up in cases of self-betrayal and lying to oneself, self-deception as well. Look out for someone trying to steal your treasure. Next, we have the 8 of Swords, and you can see here that the figure is merely flanked by these swords driven into the swamp. It's very wet where the figure is sitting. They are blindfolded, and they are bound across the arms. But they could quite easily, well, not quite easily, but they could stand up if they chose and walk forward and escape. The 8 of Swords is the illusion of being trapped in a situation, but that there is a way out. The next card is the card of the Nine of Swords. Now, sometimes people talk about the Nine of Swords as being sleepless nights. But sometimes, when you are so overcome by anxiety, the only thing you can do is sleep. There is an implication of nightmares with the Nine of Swords too. Anxiety, stress, and you can see that while this figure lies recumbent here, on their side, these swords threaten to stab them if they roll over the wrong way. Again, I really love the framing on this card. They're all very good, very well done, but that one is just very exquisite. Next, we have the Ten of Swords, and here we have somebody doing that trick with the chest, but they've been driven through with 10 swords. This figure also has a long black drape extending from this chest. They're entombed in. It's difficult to tell whether or not they are alive or dead in this particular card. But the Ten of Swords is a definitive and often painful ending, although it doesn't have to be painful. The chest is depicted on this rocky shore also. Very harsh imagery there. Next, we have the Page of Swords. The Page of Swords is on a fact-finding mission. The Page of Swords can often be a younger person who has dark hair and eyes, or is an air sign. Sometimes the Page of Swords can mean that somebody is spying on you also, but mostly it is about being on a fact-finding mission. Not necessarily the same kind of quest for enlightenment as the Hermit, or it can sometimes apply to education, but is more related to learning certain facts or certain information for purposes, for concrete reasons. Next, we have the Knight of Swords, and the Knight of Swords is an energy of somebody who champions causes because they believe that it is right, that it is just for them to be the champions of these causes. The Knight of Swords can also be a headstrong or youngish air sign person. On this card, the figure is actually wearing like very tightly embroidered armor, bearing a shield and sword, ready to do battle for any cause that seems just. And here we see that the mount is draped in black, whereas on many of the other cards, the mount is draped in white. I think that's an important distinction to make. The Queen of Swords. The Queen of Swords in the upright, championing her truth, even if people get hurt. In the reverse, an incredibly manipulative person who turns every situation to their gain. ruthless. Here, the Queen of Swords is holding out for the one to be executed, this black blindfold, while wielding the weapon of their demise with the other hand. And finally, the King of Swords. Much like the Ace of Swords, the King of Swords embodies pure elemental energy in that he is heir of air energy. This could be a very seasoned and wise person, perhaps a lawyer or a judge. Somebody who can wield his sword fairly and for justice, very much like the ancient King Solomon, who was adept at working with angels and demons both. And finally, we will be flipping through the suit of coins or pentacles in this deck. I have to say that I am so grateful that I found this deck and was able to purchase it. I'm very happy with how it was done. It's very beautiful. It's very dark, understated, and somber. I have quite a variety of decks, of course, in my care, and I'm very happy with this purchase. I very highly recommend this deck so far, and the quality of the paper is very good. We have the Ace of Coins, so some gold down here at the bottom. This is pure earth, elemental energy, the material world embodied by gold and silver. Money is a tangible form of energy to be exchanged. It is a solid representation of material wealth. We have the Two of Coins next. So, here, this figure is taking part in a balancing act which occurs over water, and again, the way that the horizon has been used in the framing of this image is just exquisite. And he's trying to get up this very easily toppled stack of chairs while holding these two symbols of his success. The Three of Coins is a card about collaborative energies. Here we have the one hand reaching to the top and the other hand reaching to the bottom. There are also implications to the Three of Coins of one's professional reputation being very good, or when reversed, people not trusting you to do your job properly. Here in the Four of Coins, this figure in the background is shoveling dirt over his treasure of these 4 coins to keep them safe and to keep them away from thieves. The Four of Coins is about holding on to things, conservation of resources. Next, we have the Five of Coins. looks like it might be a large piece of pottery or something like that. But the implication being that this is their home, that this structure is all that they have to shelter them from the elements. The Five of Coins is about feeling left out in the cold, or hitting a rough patch with one's finances. Here in the Six of Coins, we have this cloaked figure in the back, dispensing with these coins to the figures in the foreground. It can be a card of speculation. It can be a card of lending money to others also. And when reversed, it could refer to loans taken by the querent. The Seven of Coins. This card is very beautifully done. I love the sun coming up very harshly here over the horizon. That's a very, very beautiful photography effect. This figure here seems almost ashamed of the harvest of these 7 pentacles here. It is a card about hard work and labor. And there are also implications to this card of dissatisfaction with this job, either because the work was too hard or the result was not good enough. The Eight of Coins. Here we have the master craftsman drafting at a table, and over him and around him he is framed by his excellently crafted wares. I love the estates that are featured in the backgrounds of these cards too. Very, very beautiful. The Eight of Coins is about career successes. Getting to a point in your career where you are well respected in your field and sought out by many. The Nine of Coins is a card of financial freedom, whether that means through hard work or by merit of inheritance and birth. This figure is standing by the estate of their 9 pentacles. Stability. 9 is a completion. 3 is a completion. 4 is a completion. 9 is a completion. And 10 is a completion. Of all different sorts. The 10 of Coins is the ending of a financial cycle. If you do freelance or contract work, it can represent the payout for your job. Here, the 10 of Coins are hanging in the air over this chest. And again, the way that the horizons are used is just very consistent and very well done throughout this deck. Next, we have the Page of Coins. The Page of Coins, of course, can be a very young and darkly complected person. An earth sign person, possibly. But the Page of Coins, much like the Page of Cups, can represent an offering. It can represent an offering of a job or an offering of money. Next, we have the Knight of Coins, and he is carrying this bag of loot. Now, this is not necessarily the largest or most heavily laden bag of loot, but this money is coming in quickly to the querent. And again, like we saw on the page, on the night of Swords. This horse is draped not in white fabric, but this time in brown fabric. Next, we have the Queen of Coins. The Queen of Coins has her face covered, and she is showing off what she has. The Queen of Coins energy is a lot like the Nine of Coins energy, and can represent success specifically of women in the workplace, only insofar as that has been an area of contestation in the past. So any time that you have had obstacles to overcome in the workplace, the Nine of Coins and the Queen of Coins speaks specifically to that. And finally, we have the King of Coins, and here he is surrounded by wealth. The King of Coins is very established financially, has quite a bit of money at his disposal, and is a very successful businessman. Can also be an earth sign person. Thank you for joining me for this walkthrough of the Somnia Tarot by Nicolas Bruno. Thank you so much. And thank you to Nicolas Bruno for doing such an amazing job on this deck. It's very beautiful, and I'm very grateful to have a copy for myself. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, subscribe, comment down below. And I look forward to seeing you again very